पृथिवी शान्तिरन्तरिक्षगं शान्तिर् द्यौः शान्तिर्दिशः शान्तिरवान्तर दिशा शान्तिरग्निः शान्तिर्वायुः शान्तिरादित्यः शान्तिश्चन्द्रमा शान्तिर्नक्षत्राणि शान्तिरापः शान्तिरोषधयः शान्तिर्वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्गौः शान्तिरजा शान्तिरश्वः शान्तिः पुरुषः शान्तिर्ब्रह्म शान्तिर्ब्राह्मणः शान्तिः शान्तिरेव शान्तिः शान्तिर्मे अस्तु शान्तिः. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Asato ma satkamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritam gamaya, aviravirmayeti, rudrayatte dakshinam mukham, tena mam pahi nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So we shall resume our reflection on the Gita. To briefly summarize what we have seen up to this point, we saw how the first chapter sets the background, how it is Arjuna who does most of the talking in the first chapter, setting out his reasons for why he does not want to fight. He goes to the extent of saying that I'd rather live through begging, but I cannot undertake this violence, be a part or participate in this violence. And then the second chapter is when Krishna, almost completely apparently disregarding or like not even acknowledging what Arjuna has said, Krishna just says, rise up, how has this unmanliness has entered into you? And kind of in an extremely humiliating way, just says, this is not what was expected of you. That kind of a very strong response from Krishna elicits a little bit of a introspection into Arjuna's mind. And then although he begins by saying, no, I'm not going to fight and so on, some kind of a little bit of an awakening enters into our heart. And then Arjuna has the humility, which he could have said right in the beginning. He didn't. He says, I'm confused. I really do not know what is my duty at this point. My mind is confused. Please accept me as your student. In spiritual life also, the first awakening that occurs in our life, the first time when spiritual life really starts in our life, is with this little bit of a light inside, helping us look at ourselves in a way we may not have looked at before. Oftentimes in the beginning, before we started taking spiritual life seriously, when we see such people around all the time, they have answers to everything. They are sure about everything. They just know exactly what they want to do. They know exactly what this world is about. They have no doubt whatsoever. And one might think, isn't that a great thing to be so confident? Well, I mean, in general, it's nice to be confident and good. But there will be occasions in life, as it happened in Arjuna's life. And Arjuna was not a coward. He was an extremely confident, smart, intelligent, accomplished person. But this moment of crisis came on the battlefield, and all that confidence just melted away. And finally, we just find him begging and saying, I'm confused. So sometimes the kind of bravado and confidence that people show in daily life is not necessarily always the sign of strength. In fact, often it can be a rather pathetic attempt to hide their inner insecurity, inner weakness, to kind of have this extremely confident exterior. So don't be misled by how people look from outside. That is why sometimes they say appearances can be very deceptive. And so that first light is when we begin to look within and say, no, there is a lot that I do not know. I may know a lot of things about in the field that I specialize in, but some of the basic things about life itself. What is the purpose of life? Why are we here? Does life have any goal? And we might discover that I do not know anything about it. That is when spiritual life can begin. That is when we'll have the humility to say, I'm a little bit confused. I do not know. I need guidance. I need help. I need support. At that moment, when Arjuna makes that admission, Krishna's teaching begins. And we saw in this huge section, the first preliminary section of the second chapter, how Krishna begins right away by describing the nature of the Atman, the nature of the self. Again, we have already seen how the Krishna's teaching begins, seems somewhat disconnected from Arjuna's problem. And we also saw in our earlier reflections how the identity that I carry is so central to how I think, to how I behave, to what my attitude toward work is, to what my attitude towards other people is. Which is why Krishna begins right away by speaking about the true identity, which is what the Atman, the spirit, is. We also saw how, although that those passages seem to be descriptive of the nature of the Atman, a more careful reading with attention will reveal that Krishna is not speaking about some kind of an Atman residing somewhere. It's not a description about something or some principle or some whatever. It's a description about who I am. It's a description about my own nature. So when Krishna says the Atman is imperishable, when I read that passage, I don't have to think, oh, the Atman is imperishable. No, I am imperishable because I am the Atman. So when we reread those passages and put it in the first person, what apparently seems like a very description suddenly comes to life, because then it's about me, it's about who I am. So as a part of the homework, I had said that we could try to put the essence of those first section of that chapter into a first person. And last week I had even provided one sample of how that first person reading might look. Now if you take a look at verses here. Verse begin with 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37. There's suddenly a change of topic, as it were, because up to this point, Krishna has been speaking about the Atman. And we don't know what Krishna saw that made him suddenly start speaking in a little bit of like it's just changing gears while driving. He's been speaking about the Atman, and then suddenly he says, oh, this door of, look at verse 32. Fortunate certainly are the Kshatriyas who are called to fight in such a battle that comes unsought as an open gate to heaven. So he tells Arjuna, this is an open invitation to go to heaven if you fight this, because you are doing your own duty as a Kshatriya. And then he says, if you do not fight this battle, then forfeiting thine own dharma and honor, you shall incur sin. So not only will fighting this lead you to heaven, but not doing this, you will be dishonored. He says, people around you will lose your honor, and your reputation will how would you say? A reputation will be meet the dust or go into the dust. And then he says, look at verse 35. The people will believe that you have withdrawn from the battle through fear. People will think you are a coward. And then they will not have any esteem for you. Verse 36 says, they will say things about you that you will not like to hear. And what could be more intolerable than that? And then verse 37, that dying you will go to heaven. If you don't die in the battle, you will enjoy, you will win the kingdom. So Krishna is saying, well, it's a win-win situation. Now, this is very different kind of argument than saying you are the Atman. So why would Krishna suddenly do that? Now, I don't know why he did that. It's there in the Gita. So we can only speculate. One way to think about this would be that teachers oftentimes tailor their teaching or give a teaching in a way that would meet the requirement of the students. And all students are not identical. And so because students are at different stages of their growth, the teacher then will give a teaching that is right at that time for that student. And sometimes it might happen that the teacher might give a teaching or want to give an experience for which the student is not ready at that time. In more contemporary times, we know when Narendranath, as young Vivekananda, went to Ramakrishna's place, and Sri Ramakrishna was so happy to see such a pure-hearted young person. He was so overjoyed that he wanted to give him that highest experience right away. And so we read in his life, he came and he just touched him. And then suddenly, by that touch of the master, we see Narendranath, he describes that everything around him started melting. All the forms started disappearing. And that can be terrifying. And so Narendra was that time, be 18 years old, 19 years old. And he just shouted, "What are you doing to me? I've got my parents at home." And then Ramakrishna at once realized, no, he's not ready yet. So he just patted him on the back and said, okay, calm down, all in good time. And so we know at least one instance when the teaching didn't work immediately at that time. Again, as I said, I don't know what Krishna saw, but this sudden change to this might make us feel that probably Krishna saw this talk about the Atman is not right away working. And we can know that it was not right away working because if Arjuna was like the brightest student, he would have at once understood why Krishna is teaching about the Atman. And then he would have become enlightened. No, he didn't. Then the Gita would have been very small. We got 16 more chapters, which are really all the doubts and questions that Arjuna had about this teaching. And that's why second chapter is very significant, because whatever Krishna wanted to teach, he has told him in the second chapter. And if Arjuna was the brightest student, there was nothing more needed be said. But Arjuna, thankfully, it's good that he wasn't the brightest student, because all of the questions that Arjuna later asks him are the kind of questions you and I will have. And so it's possible that Krishna saw that Arjuna had probably was not grasping what he was saying. And so therefore he gives him this teaching about a little bit more earthly way, which might be a little bit more relevant. It's like sometimes when you're listening to the news, that on television or on radio, and oftentimes they have their segments. In the beginning, they'll have something about politics or what social issues, and then maybe there's a segment on news about sports and stuff like that. Now, if someone is not interested in politics, so you'll have the news on, but you may not be paying as much attention. And if you're interested in sports, as soon as the news about sports start coming, you suddenly perk up and you say, oh, okay, this is what I'm interested in. So Krishna was just trying to see at what level Arjuna was, and that's why he gives him some of these reasons. You want to go to heaven, you can go to heaven if you do this. If you don't, what will people think about you? So all of these different levels at which Krishna is trying to urge Arjuna to carry out his duty. So that segment, those 4 or 5 verses are important to kind of just understand the context. So after having told Arjuna that this is the nature, this is your identity as the Atman, the next thing would be, how do I attain it? Take a look at verse number 39. Esha te abhihita sankhe buddhir yoge tvimam shrunu buddhya yukto yaya partha karma bandham prahasyasi. The wisdom of self-realization has been declared unto you. Hearken now to the wisdom of yoga, endued with which, O son of Pritha, thou shalt break through the bonds of karma. So, whenever Krishna uses the word yoga, in general, so don't take it as a very rigid rule, but oftentimes when he speaks about yoga, it usually means karma yoga. So the knowledge of the self has been given up to this point, and then verse 39 he says, I've given you that knowledge, now I'll show you how to attain that knowledge. The main obstruction to the attainment of that knowledge is what he says, karma bandham, the bondage of karma. And so then in the next few verses, he describes the path of karma yoga, because it is karma yoga that will purify the heart, that will remove the bondage of karma. So when that heart is purified, then I will be able to see things clearly. When I see these things clearly, then I will know that I am the Atman. Right now, when we are told you are the infinite spirit, birthless and deathless, it kind of feels good to hear that. But that's not how we feel we are. No matter how often we are told you are the divine being, we still think, yeah, well, that's good to know I'm a divine being. But still, as I go about carrying out my duties and responsibilities, I very much feel myself to be a human being. So intellectually, I may be the spirit. In practice, in my daily experience, I am still a mortal human being with all the stresses and worries and anxieties and so on. And that has got to change. And the only way to change that is to start seeing things clearly. And if I see things clearly, I will know that my present understanding of myself is not accurate. If I see things clearly, I will know that I am indeed the infinite, birthless, deathless one. But what stands in the way is my ignorance. And what ignorance leads to is this bondage of karma. So what I'm going to do now is, for the next 10 or 15 minutes, speak a little bit about karma. Because to understand karma yoga, we need to understand karma. Now, karma is a topic that we have discussed often and often. And many of you are already familiar with the basics of the karma theory. But even though we are familiar with it, our idea about karma often gets mixed up with the popular notions of karma. And that's why sometimes we get confused, or it doesn't seem to make sense. Because as soon as a word enters into mainstream language, anyone and everyone starts using it. And when it starts getting used too often by too many people who are innocent of the context of the term, then the word gradually acquires newer connotations, newer meanings, and gets oftentimes distorted from the original context in which that word emerged. And therefore, while it's fine to use karma in whatever context you wish to use it, when we understand karma while thinking about the Vedantic worldview, we need to understand it exactly as it is. So, before I go there, take a look at verse number 47. That's one of the very well-known verses, often quoted from the Gita. Karmanye vadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phala hetur bhur ma te sangostva karmani. Thy right is to work, but never to the fruits thereof. Be thou not the producer of the fruits of thy actions, neither let thy attachment be toward inaction. So you can work, but don't ask for the results of work. So this is the, so why are the results of work a problem? Why is karma itself a problem? So that's what we'll try to see, a general discussion about, because it's not complicated. It's quite simple, but we need to keep it simple, because sometimes we make simple things complicated because we don't see them in a clear way. So with the clear eyes, not through any distorted lens. First of all, karma is a theory. It's not a dogma, it's not a doctrine. It's possible to be a Vedanta student and have nothing to do with karma. So karma is just a way of understanding what happens in life. It's a way, it's a method. Things happen, and if some things don't make sense in our life, we question them. Why is this happening? Oftentimes, all of us are so, I guess instinctively, are self-centered in some ways. So why is this happening to me? But also objectively, why do things happen to people? And one natural human instinct is, when good things happen to people, people generally don't question it. It's like we are entitled to all the happiness and joy. But if some painful things happen, then we say, why? Why should this happen? Or why should this happen to me? Or why did this happen to somebody else? And if we are able to find a cause for it, then we are saying, okay, this is the cause, this was the effect. But oftentimes we are not able to find the cause, and then things seem bizarre. So what do? All of the life that we see, our own life and the lives of people around us, how do we understand how and why things happen? I mean, one basic question would be, why am I even born? Science or biology can tell us how people are born. The how, the when, the what, these questions, a knowledge of science can help us solve. But why there is no way to know why. And if we don't know it, we can at least speculate about it. And we might say, well, what is the use of speculation? Because it cannot be proved one way or the other. That's true. But if we can have a theory which will answer not only that question, but all related questions, and seem to make sense if then that theory, even though it is a theory, even though it is unproved, will provide some basis for me to navigate my way through life. Now, just a simple example. If I say, well, one of the ways that people have tried to answer things that happen, but they just experience of joy and sorrow. Why are some people happy? Why are some people unhappy? And so one way would be to say, everything happens through God's will, and God willed it that way. Now that's problematic, obviously, because, well, people who are happy will have no problem. But if someone is suffering and painful, that person can really ask, why would God will that I should suffer? Why? What have I done? Doesn't God love me as much as God loves these other seemingly fortunate ones? So that goes against our idea about God being a loving presence, that God loves us all equally. Another way to answer that would be, who can understand divine will? Who can understand why God does it that way? Now that's really not an answer. To say that, well, who can understand God means saying, I really don't know. And then one other answer would be that no reason, just chance or bad luck. If you are suffering, too bad. There's no rhyme or reason. But that's not satisfying either. Not only is it not satisfying, but if anything can happen to anyone for no good reason, it completely breaks down the moral order of the universe. Like, why should I be good? Why shouldn't I do evil? Because it's just random chance. Anything can happen to anyone. So if we believe that there is some such order in this larger scheme of things, and again, we have no proof that there is any order or not. So we are then consciously or unconsciously creating a theory. And karma is a theory. Now, karma as a theory is based on just three simple premises. And if we disagree with any of these three premises, then the karma theory is probably not for us. So one premise is that actions have consequences, that there is such a thing as cause and effect in life. Everything that happens has some cause. Things don't just happen out of nowhere. That's the first premise. The second premise is that we want to be happy. It will be difficult or almost impossible to find a person in their right minds who will say, I just want to be miserable. No, I think we might have different ideas about what will make us happy. But whether or not we express it in that way, we want happiness and we don't want suffering. That's the second premise. And a third premise is that there is such a thing as justice in life. Although in short term things may not seem to make sense, but in a long term there is such a thing as justice. And a justice here simply means that goodness will be rewarded in some way and evil will be punished in some way. And a reward in very general terms would mean anything that goes to produce happiness, sukha. And a punishment, in a very broad terms, would mean anything that goes to produce sorrow or suffering. Now, these things often get more concretized in the human mind, if you like. Then we begin to say, well, then a reward would be some place where there'll be a lot of happiness. That's how heavens become a part of our imagination. Or some place where there'll be a lot of suffering. Then hells become a part of our imagination. So all this structure about heaven, hell, all of these based on these three premises. And so karma theory simply based on these three premises. So every action that we do, if it is a good action, it will lead to some good result, which eventually would mean happiness in some form. But actions are of different kinds, and therefore the result, even though it may be a happiness in some form, how intense that happiness will be, how long that happiness will last, will depend on the action itself. And same thing with regard to pain. If the action is bad, then it will lead to some kind of sorrow. Again, how intense that sorrow will be, how long it will last, will depend on the action. So that's the basic premise. Now, what it does do is it, first of all, it frees God from this problem of willing this or willing that. It simply means I am responsible for what I am experiencing. Now, sometimes that seems harsh. It doesn't seem harsh if I say I'm responsible for all the joy I have got. But it does seem harsh to say, well, I'm responsible for all my suffering. And we will see why that kind of thinking is not very helpful. Whichever way we look at karma, one thing is certain, it's extremely empowering. By empowering, I mean that it puts me on the steering wheel. If my life is seen as a form of driving a car, then I am the one at the wheel. If I want the car to go fast, if I want the car to be safe, I'm responsible because I'm at the wheel. If I'm careless, if I'm irresponsible, if I fall asleep, if I'm whatever, car can meet with an accident. And I have nobody to blame because I'm at the wheel. So karma theory puts us at the wheel of the vehicle of our life, which means that whatever I'm experiencing now, if it is the result of my actions of the past, then my future depends on what I'm going to do now. And therefore my future is under my control, not in the control of some unseen destiny or fate, not even under the control of God. Be with me on this karma theory. This might seem very, very heretical to say that. So I control my own future. I am the master of my own future. So it's very empowering. Again, to kind of put it in a very compressed way, every action produces a result, but I do a lot of actions and there is not enough time to experience the results of all those actions. In other words, think in terms of just money, for instance. So, if there's a certain amount I may earn a salary every month. Now, if I'm not able to spend all of that income within that time period, then my balance is going to increase. Because I earn a certain amount, I'm able to spend a little bit, but something remains. And then next month I earn some more, and then something remains. And so my balance is going to increase, which is When you think about it in terms of dollars, which is not a bad thing if my balance keeps on increasing. But when you think in terms of karma, every karma I do, think in terms of karma dollars. Like every karma I do, depending on what the nature of that karma is, it is going to produce some sukha or dukkha, some joy or some sorrow. Every time I experience joy or sorrow, I'm spending my karma dollars. That's oftentimes called the karma phala, the results of work. So one side, I'm earning karma dollars by doing good or bad actions. On the other side, I'm spending the karma dollars by experiencing joy and sorrow. At the end of the life, my income is always more. And so now what happens to this karma which is yet to give its results, and now time to die, the body is going to now fall. And that is how the idea of a rebirth is directly connected with the idea of karma. So this unfinished karma then leads to the next birth. Because that karma has to be worked out. It's like a bullet that has left the gun has to go. You can't like say, okay, you shoot a bullet. It sounds terrible with the things that are happening in the world today. So anyway, bear with me. So after you have shot the bullet, you throw the gun. Now because you've thrown away the gun or destroyed the gun, the bullet doesn't get destroyed. The bullet will go and hit the target. So if I have done the karma, then that sukha or dukkha, that joy or sorrow has to come. And if I die before that, then that joy and sorrow has to come somewhere, sometime, which is why then one gets another body. That's how the idea of karma is directly related to the cause of my birth. So why are we born? I am born to experience the results of my karma balance from my earlier births. Now theoretically, if I say, okay, the best way then, okay, first of all, one might say one thing else. Why is being born a problem? I think when everything is going fine, it doesn't seem to be a problem. In fact, death seems to be a problem. Like, well, I have to leave all this and go. On the other hand, how many people can we find truly in life who can touch their heart and say, I have no problem of any kind? Neither at the physical level nor at the emotional level, no problem. I am the happiest being on this planet. Now, there are people who say that. But if you kind of just probe inside, it will be difficult to find anyone who can say, I'm the most satisfied person. It's not about saying it, it's about, and what we will see, what the Gita's teaching is, that only one who has become truly enlightened, that is what the second section of this book, which speaks about the person of steady wisdom, sthita prajna, is the one, only such a person can say, I have no problem. But short of that spiritual enlightenment, nobody can say that. As long as I am identified with this body, whatever happens to the body seems to be happening to me. If the body is ill, I feel I am ill. I need to put on a mask when I go out. Social distancing is only between bodies, not between the Atman. But still, social distancing is necessary today because we are identified with the bodies that we are occupying. And so as long as I am identified with the body and mind, the limitations and everything that goes along with it belong to me. And so therefore, as long as I am attached to these finite things like body, mind, ego, I cannot truly be happy. I might have glimpses of happiness. I might have bits of happiness here and there. But that happiness will always be punctuated by sorrow and suffering. That's what our life is. Just look at your life up to this point. Sure, there have been great moments of joy, great moments of fun and happiness. There have been also moments of pain, sorrow, suffering, dejection. And they seem to go, they alternate. So there are good times, and then there are bad times. And then there are good times, and then there are bad times. There are good times. So it's like we go up and down with the wave. And someone might say, that's fine with me. Well, so long as it's fine with you, be happy going up and down in life. And what the karma theory says is that up and down will never end. Because I'll keep on doing more and more karma. I cannot live without karma. And I'll keep on producing the results. In order to produce the results, in order to experience the results, I have to take birth. When I take birth, again I'm going to do more karma. It's a vicious cycle. And that's why this verse 39 speaks as karma bandha, the bondage of karma. And what karma yoga does is it teaches us how that karma bondage can be broken. Karma is like a key. Now, we know that if you have a lock, then you need a key. And so far as I know, it's the same key that you use for locking a door and unlocking a door. I don't know, unless there is some new clocks which have come now. The one key for locking and another key for unlocking. But usually, at least the traditional locks, you can never say nowadays, some new things coming. Well, there are keyless locks now also. So, I'm just speaking about the old-fashioned traditional lock. So, what do? You want to lock it, you turn it one way. You want to unlock it, you turn it the opposite way. Karma is the key. If I turn it one way, it increases my bondage. If I turn it just the opposite way, then it frees me. So karma itself is not a bondage. It's the way we turn karma. And what karma yoga says is what the way my attitude towards karma has been, the way I am doing my work, the way I relate to my activities is a wrong way. Is a wrong way because rather than helping me become free, it is creating more trouble. And that's been a general experience in our lives. More work is more stress, more anxiety. Often there are work-related difficulties we have at the workplace. Even when we come home after work, we cannot forget the problems at the workplace. So even our home life, a time we spend with the family, gets affected because work will never leave us. Now, karma yoga means, can I do the same work but in a different way, with a different frame of mind, having a different relationship with my work? If I can do that, then the same work which up to this point was producing so much stress and worry and anxiety, the same work, if I do it in this different way, will in fact bring about a lot of freedom in my life, will bring me a great joy in my life, will bring me that greater clarity in my heart by which I will then know I am the Atman. That the body and mind are just layers over me, but in fact I am the Atman. So that, in a nutshell, is what the karma theory is and what Krishna is teaching Arjuna. That now, that's the great, Arjuna is on the battlefield. This is, karma is very much involved. Krishna is telling Arjuna, do your duty. And carrying out the duty in that context means going and fighting that battle. Now that fighting, that activity, Krishna says, if you do it well, if you do it correctly, that will give you the clarity which you will know you are the Atman. All the confusion in your mind will go away if you are able to do the work in the way it ought to be done. That's the middle section of the second chapter. And the last section, which we will see next Sunday, will be when a person carries out this karma or practices karma yoga in this way, purifies their heart, understands, not just understands intellectually, but actually experiences their true nature as the Atman, and then become enlightened. How does such a person live? How does such a person move? How can we recognize a person who has become enlightened? That will be the concluding section of the chapter. So the first section was about the nature of the Atman. What we saw today is about how to attain that clarity of the mind, to attain the Atman. What we will see next week is what will happen when I succeed in my attempt. When I become enlightened, what kind of a person I will be when I become enlightened. But that next week. So what we will do now is take a 5-minute break. And if you have any questions, you can post them. And then after 5 minutes, we can take a look at some of these questions. I'll try to answer as many as I can. Please try to keep your questions as short and to the point, so that we will have time to answer many questions. And don't ask very complicated questions. Ask me some simple questions. All right? So, 5-minute break. Okay, so let's take a look at these questions. Thank you for all the greetings and the questions that have come. So we'll take them up one by one. Grace of the Supreme is said to be necessary in wherever we want to go. Is there a path available in our everyday lives for seeking that? How can we become objects of His grace? So in the second chapter, there isn't much talk about grace, and it's a big subject in itself. Grace often gets associated with the path of bhakti or devotion, but the scope of grace is much wider than simply the path of bhakti yoga. In general, we can say that when good things happen in our life and we are not immediately able to recognize the cause of that thing, then if the person is religious minded, the person says, well, this good thing happened, I do not know what I did to deserve this, it's God's grace. And some people who are especially have the devotion to God in a more pronounced manner in their lives, even when they achieve something through their efforts, rather than attribute it to their own efforts, they say, no, it all happened through God's grace. So grace is a big subject, and certainly there is place for it, and we don't know whether there is any specific way to attain that grace, because God's grace is often said to be unconditional. If it's unconditional, then what am I going to do? And the only thing what we can do is make ourselves fit for that grace. So there is this view which Sri Ramakrishna expressed, that it's not as if God's grace comes to some people and doesn't. The idea is that God's grace is always available for everybody. But not every one of us has made ourselves fit to receive it. Not every one of us has opened our hearts to allow that grace to go inside. And sometimes even the grace comes, if we are not clear-sighted, we may not even recognize it. So that would be one way to understand it, that we can acquire grace in our life if we open our hearts and minds to the presence of the divine in our lives. Because God's grace is always available to those who want it. That's the idea. How to solace someone who, though devoted to God, is grief-stricken for untimely death of a family member. The best way is to put ourselves in place of the person that we are trying to offer solace to. When someone is suffering, the most insensitive way to deal with that is to tell that person, that's your karma, or that's God's will. How do you know? And then how does that help? So, when we are grieving, the best support we can receive, or if someone else is grieving, the best support we can give is to share that grief, to empathize with the other person. And not just as a matter of policy. If I can truly share, the load on the suffering person's mind gets reduced if there are people around who are truly willing to share that grief. And so that's what we need to do. And when things calm down, that would be the time then to ask why this suffering occurred. About untimely death of a family member, although this phrase untimely is often used, it's somewhat meaningless, because when is a death timely? There is no timely death. And when someone close to us dies, we always are going to feel this person should have been with us a longer time. So I don't think there is any timely death. Think about it this way. One might think that, well, when a person is very old, that might be a timely death. But there is no such rule. People die at all ages. So, and no one has really guaranteed that, although oftentimes in general it is said, Shatayur vai Purushaha, the human being's lifespan is 100 years. There is no guarantee that anyone will live up to that, or less than that, or more than that. So, therefore, untimely death is, although again, it's a very common usage, if you think about it, it probably doesn't mean much. It's just that what it can do, especially about in matters of death, because it is so uncertain, because none of us knows how much time we have, we recognize the preciousness of life. We recognize that every moment we have with a loved one is a precious moment. And therefore, rather than waste that time of association in frivolous things and matters and talks, we can use it in a more constructive, healthy, positive, fulfilling way. So that would be a lesson that we can see, especially in the times in which we live, when the pandemic has already claimed so many lives and continues to do so. Even every day that passes, this can be a big eye-opener about the fragility of human life and the preciousness of it, and how we need to value the presence of every human being in our midst. What to speak of those who are very close to us. Verse 36, Krishna says people will describe you with unkind words. How should we understand this? From the perspective, we should not live by what others say or think of you. That is true. If someone can remain completely unaffected by what others think of them, then they don't have to worry about it. But obviously, Arjuna has not reached that state. And I would imagine many of us too. We do care what people think about us. If someone totally didn't care what people thought about them, they would not have a mirror in there at home. Why do you need to look in a mirror? Because essentially, we don't see ourselves. It's other people who see us. And if we don't care what other people think about us, then you don't need a mirror at all. So anyway, that's kind of a frivolous way of saying that when we become enlightened, when we become sthita prajna, we probably wouldn't care. But until then, people do. Yeah. In verse 33, Krishna mentioned dharma and honor. Could you elaborate on how a Vedanta student should understand dharma? Dharma, it's a big subject. I think we probably could this topic will come up again. I mean, in this chapter itself, Krishna speaks about swadharma. So dharma is a topic that will come, and we will discuss it in future talks. Could you please expound a bit on verse 245? What does it mean to transcend the three gunas and how to remain sattva even when engaged in work action? Again, these topics will, this is what Arjuna will also ask Krishna in the subsequent chapters. So I don't want to go too much into detail because we are going to go through the study of the entire Gita. But in general, I could say that everything that is material is controlled by the three gunas. And as long as I'm identified with the body and mind, I'm under the sway of these gunas. The later chapters of the Gita, 16, 17, and 18, they will have a special focus on the three gunas, and we will have a time to discuss them that time. If karma is a theory, are there experiments we can do in our daily life to prove or disprove it? Absolutely. It's easy. If you have a lighted candle, stick a finger into it, not for too long. If you feel a burning sensation, that's karma theory for you. You did an action and there is an immediate reaction. You don't have to be reborn to experience that burn. It can happen right away. So it's a theory that works. That works in visible ways, like the example I mentioned. And in invisible ways, of course, it's still a theory. You can't prove that if I've done something, if I experience happiness now, and if there is no immediate, tangible cause for it, I just have to believe that because there is such a thing as some kind of a just order in the universe, if I'm experiencing happiness, something has been done by me, and by which I got this happiness. Because sometimes people order things from Amazon and forget about it. And then suddenly a packet arrives. And then you think, wow, who sent this? I must have got a gift. It was the grace of my friend. And then you suddenly, oh no, I placed an order for it 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and completely forgotten about it. So sometimes things might happen in our life, We might be surprised by it. We might think why it has come. Of course, if it's Amazon, some good product, you won't be unhappy about it. But you have paid for it in some way. That's one example. Okay. Seeking to do certain type of work that one enjoys at workplace, is that seeking action or seeking fruits of action? Well, doing a work that we enjoy doing is fine. I mean, why not? Why should we dislike it? We don't have to dislike the work that we do. But the work itself can be such a fulfilling experience that the results of work will not matter. So doing the work itself can be so joyful. Of course, if the work is successful, you're going to be happy. Not that you're just going to be like a wall. Of course, it's going to make you happy. Or if the work does not succeed, of course, you're going to feel sad. But that happiness or that sadness will not be so overwhelming that it affects you. So it's okay to feel happy. It's okay to feel sad. But we should still be grounded. That's the idea. And so, yeah, by all means, if someone can find a work that they enjoy doing, well, that's grace for you. Is getting God's grace outside the law of karma? Yes, because God is beyond the bounds of karma. And so God is not bound by karma. So whatever comes from God is also not bound by karma. That is a very short answer, and we will have time to elaborate it when we discuss further later on. While you are responsible for reactions from your actions while driving, but when accident is caused by someone else and it is not your doing, then still it's your karma. Yes. So that's true. A lot of times accidents happen not because I have done something, because somebody else has come and say, dashed against your car. And we might say, well, if that person's actions, why am I suffering for it? And I think that's a good question. The only thing that we can say is that the pain and the suffering that I'll have as a result of someone else's mistake, that cause and effect relationship is wrong. So, suppose I am hurt by somebody else's mistake while driving. My hurt is due to some action of mine in the past, and I may never know what that action is, but it's not the result of that person's action. Although, on the face of it, that's how it looks. And we might say, well, but that's how the theory is. All that we can ask is that there were 10 other cars on the street that time. Why this person car came and made a mistake and touched my car and not someone else's car? And the only thing that we can say, if we follow this theory, is that rather than go and hit some other car, this person's car hit mine because some amount of suffering was due to me for reasons I do not know. Now, just because I do not know it doesn't mean that they don't exist. Isn't there something they say? The absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. So just because I don't know what the cause is does not mean that the cause is not there. Think about it. Isn't the idea of wanting to be happy always an unsustainable ideal? Instead of, should we not welcome, accept both positive and negative emotions as we experience life? True. I mean, that's exactly what Krishna teaches when he, I think it is the 12th verse of the 2nd chapter, Matra sparshas tu kaunteya shitoshna sukha dukkhadaha heat and cold, the ups and downs of life, that you bear it patiently without being affected by the ups and downs, which is what you are saying about welcoming both. Well, yeah. So one can accept the good and bad that happens as being, this is just what life is. And there are a lot of people who do think that way. And that attitude can be sometimes helpful to not remain, to not get affected. Either way, not wildly celebrating when good things happen and not bitterly getting depressed when bad things happen. And that is a good attitude to have, of course. In fact, if we have that attitude, we are going a little bit closer to acquiring that clarity of mind to know that we are the Atman, to remaining unaffected by the external ups and downs of life. Within karma theory, then, it seems that there is no way to get out since our account only continues to increase. Yes, karma can never be, think about it this way, that if I say I can stop, I'll stop working. So no more income, I'll just go on spending that I have. Eventually my balance will go to zero. Unfortunately, in karma, that doesn't happen. We cannot not do things. Like sometimes sometimes when, let's say there's someone at home who's not doing any work, and so sometimes someone will say, don't just sit there, do something. Actually, doing something is much easier than just sitting there, because we cannot just sit. Physically, even if you're just sitting in one place, the mind is still wandering, and that's activity. So it's impossible. As long as we are identified with the body and mind, it's impossible not to be, let me see, the two negatives. It's impossible to do nothing, or it's impossible not to do, okay, forget it. It's, we cannot not work. They will be always active. And that's why karma will always be done. So yes, so therefore it can never end by experiencing. The only way to end it is to set it on fire. And it can be set on fire through what the Gita will describe as a fire of knowledge, the knowledge that I am the Atman, not just the intellectual knowledge, experience that I am the Atman. It can be set on fire through God's grace. It can be set on fire through any number of ways, and Gita will discuss it in the subsequent chapters. So long as the cycle of birth and death continues to account for accrued karma, Atman passes across several lives before it is truly elevated and finds moksha. At the end of current life, the imperishable Atman leaves sthula body. Rather, sukshma body, which is mainly our acquired samskara tendencies, stay with the Atman till then. Yes, the sukshma sharira, which means really the mind, the intellect, the ego, the senses, and the memories and the samskara, all of this together is called the sukshma sharira, the subtle body. And that will remain with the Atman. So therefore, the problem really is not this gross body. Because whether we like it or not, it's going to go away. It's much, much more perishable than the mind. It's the mind that's the problem. And the mind being so subtle, so fine, it lasts much longer. Now take any of these in your computers or stuff like that. The hardware oftentimes needs more fixing, and the hardware can eventually crumble. But the software has a much longer shelf life than the hardware. So you can look upon, it's not a very good analogy, but you can kind of look upon the subtle body as that subtle part which lives much longer. In fact, it's the subtle body that produces the continuity, that provides the continuation from one life to the next. How to separate our essence, the sense of Atman, from the karma, the work that we do? What about people that define themselves by the work they do? People who define themselves by the work they do are affected by the work they do. If the work is successful, they will be happy. If the work fails, they'll be depressed. And they have gotten identified with the work. Not just identified just with the body and mind, but also with the work. And so that is even a greater state of bondage. Vivekananda compares working to solve the world's problems to the act of straightening a dog's curly tail. The tail always curls back. I'd love to hear about why we should try to straighten it anyway. Good question. So we try to straighten the world, even though it cannot be straightened. But if we do it in the right way, I can be straightened. In other words, I cannot change the basic nature of the world, but my own wrong understanding of myself, that can be permanently changed. The change that we accomplish in the external world, that's always going to be temporary. But the change that I can produce in my own self, that is not temporary. That is permanent. So if I feed a hungry person, I've done some amount of good to the world, but that hungry person will become hungry again after 8 or 10 hours. But if I have done it selflessly, the purity of heart that I acquire will not remain only for 10 hours. The purity of the heart I acquire is mine. That no one can take it away. But the other person whom I have fed will become hungry again. So what we do to the world will be temporary, but what I can do to myself will be permanent. And that is why Karma Yoga can change me, but cannot change the world. Which is why we need reformers in every generation, in every country, to kind of keep this world machine working. It needs constant fixing. And if we try to fix it well, we will get fixed permanently, but the world will continue to. While all the verses in the Gita are important, some verses have weightage than others. Is there a text which highlights the important verses in the Gita? Find out for yourself. We don't need to be. See, you read the Gita. If you find some verses speak to you, if they are important, read them more often. But I don't see any point why someone else should tell you this verse is important and this is not. I think every one of us need to make an independent study, and we might find in it things that others may not find. So even all this reflection that I am trying to do on the Gita, do not take it as a very definitive final statement on the Gita. These are just the thoughts that come to my mind. This is what, when I read the Gita, this is what I get. It's not necessary that when you read the Gita, this is exactly how you should see it. Maybe when you read the Gita based on your life's experiences, you might get a different lesson from it, which is fine, which is not in any way less valuable than what lesson someone else will get. If the Atman is identical across all beings, what is the thing that is reborn? This thing that is reborn must be shared only between some beings. Well, what is reborn is the Atman identified with that body and mind. So the body and mind itself is material. The Atman itself is spiritual. So the Atman on its own is never born, so there is no question of it being reborn. The body, which is simply dust, also cannot be born. But it is kind of a combination between the two, which gives the appearance of birth and death and rebirth. So it's just the seemingly impossible meeting of spirit and matter. Karma Yoga will free me and I'll be enlightened. Which way do I turn the key? The yoga way. So there is a term called roga in Sanskrit. Roga means a disease. So if I turn the key the wrong way, then work becomes a disease. So workaholics, people who like work all the time, they're not necessarily karma yogis. that's a kind of a disease with them. But if I turn the right way, then it becomes yoga. Rather than getting me more attached to the perishable material world, it frees me and takes me nearer to God. And there is a whole chapter later on Karma Yoga. We'll be able to discuss it more often there. In the theory of karma, are we solely responsible for all the circumstances of our lives? Or is there a consideration that others' karmas may also be imposed on us? No, the circumstances of our lives are not the result of karma. So this is important to remember. The result of karma is only my own happiness or sorrow. That's it. But what circumstances come, that's not the result of karma. All that we can say is, if life follows the path of least resistance, then we can say that nature perhaps puts us in circumstances that will be most congenial for me to receive the kind of karma results I'm due for. But the circumstances themselves are not determined by karma. What karma determines is only the experience of joy or sorrow. Is work transformed into karma yoga simply based on my inner attitude toward it? Does the attitude of surrender have to be present in your mind and heart constantly while performing work, or once? I think generally, again, this will be discussed in detail when there is a chapter on karma yoga later on. But it's good to know that in the beginning, at least when we begin the work, at the beginning we can think of God, we can offer the results to God, we can, whichever way one wants to look upon the activity. We can either do work, do good because it's good to do good, it doesn't involve a theistic idea of God there. On the other hand, if someone has a devotional attitude, one can say, whatever I do, all my knowledge, skill has come to me through God's grace. So before I begin my work, I pray to God and say, I offer it to you. And then when that particular activity ends, then I can do it once again at the end. So these 2 points, beginning of activity, the ending of activity, these are the 2 times I can do it. Now, during the work, if there is a respite, if I remember, I can mentally make an offering. Doesn't even take 1 second. Now, sometimes the work, I might get so engrossed in it, I may not remember it at all during the work, which is okay. But let me make it a habit to remember at least in the beginning and in the end. And once that becomes a habit, we will discover that invariably, even while working, some part of our mind will just remind us, send us a small tweet saying, remember God. That's about it. Can you offer some advice how to work in this crazy world and not create more karma? In order to do anything, there has to be an agent of action. So I must have the ego, I am doing it. Then I will be the one who is experiencing it. So one way to not create more karma is to get this feeling out of the way that I am doing it. And again, it will be discussed later on in detail, but if we look upon, essentially every work is done through the body and mind. So when it's like you're working, now for instance, here is this laptop on which I'm seeing everything. Now I'm thinking I'm the one who is working this is only an instrument. Now what if the laptop starts thinking I'm the one who is doing all this? Now that's not right, because the laptop is only an instrument, and there is this conscious being who is operating it, right? Now all the work that we do is done by the body and mind. Now the body and mind in themselves are not much different from a computer. A computer is an instrument, the body and mind are also instruments. But the conscious being, the Atman, that is operating the body and mind, just as I'm operating the laptop. So, if I'm the Atman, this is the body and mind. So the Atman is operating this body and mind. If I can remember that, at least at the beginning of work, that I'm not doing anything. It's the body and mind that are doing it. That's one way to not create more karma. But obviously, and this doesn't need to be said, that this can work only if I'm doing something which is moral and good and ethical. So if someone says, I want to go and kill somebody, it's only the body and mind that's doing it. And the Atman doesn't work. So the work has to be ethical, moral. And then we'll again see what constitutes ethics. Every answer I give will raise more questions, but that's the general idea. There are times when you want to change, correct things you have done as part of your karma. How do you do that? How do we all remove a bit of Duryodhana in us and become more like Arjuna? Just through practice. Everybody makes mistakes in life, and if we are able to identify the mistake, then we resolve to say, I will not make this mistake again. Because that which is done has been done. You cannot undo it. You have to face the consequences of our past actions. But I can learn from my past actions. If I recognize the mistakes I have made, then I will resolve never to make that kind of mistake again. So that's the only way the Duryodhana part within us can be destroyed and become more like Arjuna. Yoga Vasishta appears to question cause and effect. I understood you also saying that law of karma is a useful theory to mold our life, not compulsory. Yeah, it's not compulsory, of course. The thing is, if karma theory doesn't make sense, we must have some alternate theory which is more satisfying than karma theory. And if we can find a theory that is more satisfying, then you don't need a karma theory. To do karma yoga, do we need to identify ourselves as the Atman? Isn't karma yoga a path to help us to realize exactly that? Yes. So that's essentially it. We have to make an effort to think that we are the Atman. Or if we are theistically oriented, we can think of ourselves as an instrument in the hands of God. So thinking about ourselves as the Atman is not the only way to do practice karma yoga. There is also a devotional way to practice the same way. And yes, until we have realized it, we are not going to be able to do it perfectly. But that's the practice. We keep on doing things imperfectly, failing a lot of times on the way. But if we persist with our practice, then eventually we'll fail less often. Eventually, our imperfections will become less and less and less. And a time will come, we will be able to do it perfectly. Okay, so only a few more questions. So no more questions now after I have whatever I have here, because really it's getting too late. And I'm sure all of you are feeling hungry. I'm feeling hungry, so I imagine you also must be feeling hungry. Okay, let's see. How one may determine their karmas in life when having a teacher like Krishna is in question? Well, I mean, we make so many decisions in life already. We make our choices in life. And so depending on the skills that we have, the knowledge that we have, the opportunities that we have to make the best use of them in life. And in case we have doubts and in case we are confused, the way Arjuna was, then we can take the help of people around us whose judgment we trust. And that's essentially what a family is for, what a community is for, what teachers are for. So it's good to have a network of people around us whose judgment we trust. And so there is something that we don't know in life, one should one should have that humility to recognize I need help, and then take help from an authentic source, because sometimes people do come to grief when they receive help from someone which was not so dependable. In fact, let me just share with you one thing. There was this one person I met in India, and so so when we were talking, another one gentleman came by whom that person knew. So they greeted each other and they talked, and then that friend left. Then this person with whom I was speaking, he was telling me about that friend of his. So he was saying that this friend of mine, we were together in one place some 15 or 20 years ago, and we were very close. And he said, whenever I had any difficulty, whenever I was not sure what I should do, I would always go and ask this friend for advice of what I should do. And whatever this friend told me to do, I always did the opposite, and it always worked. So he said, I'm very grateful to this person. So you can get people's help in many different ways, I guess. Do misdeeds done in innocence, like that of children or adults who haven't grown up, accrue bad karma? Again, I mean, these are such general questions. I think a little child who doesn't know that fire can burn, if a little child were to stick their finger inside a burning candle, because they are innocent doesn't mean that the finger won't burn. So clearly, there is going to be some effect. And at the physical level, one can understand. But if someone commits some other errors, like, I mean, there are even when people get killed, even legally, there are different terms. I'm not a legal expert, so I don't know. But it's like premeditated murder or involuntary manslaughter. There are different categories. So the actual result is a person has been killed. But how the person was killed, whether it was intentional or not, whether it was premeditated murder or not, or whether it was an accidental death, there are punishments involved in all of these cases. But even though the actual result is a person is dead, the punishments are not identical, depending on. So in that, we would imagine that karma would probably be something like that. Again, it's a theory. And we will think about this theory in a way we think about things that happen in the world. Much work involves concentration. How to do such work while simultaneously remembering I am not the body, this is not mine. Again, as I said, while you're doing the work, especially concentration work, you may not need this, and you may not. It's not necessary. But before you begin that concentrated activity, remind yourself of this truth, which will put you in a right frame of mind. And then you can do the work with full attention, don't get distracted even by the Atman. And then when the work ends, once again you can remember it. So that would be a good way to do it. It'll be terrible while you're driving, especially in a lot of traffic, to again simultaneously thinking I am the Atman. Not a good idea. All right, so I want to believe in the theory of karma because of the benefits, but I don't always think it's correct. You said it's not necessary for a Vedanta student to believe it. Say more. No, not necessary to believe it. If you can find an alternative theory which is more satisfying than karma, go for it. If you do something that is atrocious and causes others pain, but detach yourself from it and consider it your duty, do you not have any karmic consequences? Well, if it is atrocious, if you have brought pain to others, one would think that, if you use the adjective atrocious, that means it was something not good. If it's not good, then you have to suffer for it. But if you have done something, for instance, now sometimes when a surgeon, after the surgery, it can be extremely painful, but the surgeon will not be punished for it because the intention was to actually help the other person. So again, it's not just what happens, but the intention behind it, that is also important. And finally, the last question. Will people with good karma in this birth be born again? Yes. As long as we have a karma balance, we will be born again. One final thought. All this rebirth, etc., that we are talking about, karma theory encompasses the entire existence itself. So don't limit it only to this particular planet Earth. We know we are not as great as we think we are. The planet Earth, only even within our planetary system, is a pretty insignificant planet. The sun, the brightest object known to us, is a pretty insignificant star in our own galaxy. There are unimaginable number of galaxies. We are not even a particle of dust. So when we think about a rebirth, again, I don't have any proof for this. All that I'm saying is, one doesn't have to limit ourselves into thinking we're going to be born again here in this planet Earth. We don't know. Well, maybe, maybe not. I don't have any answers. But so, if you have good karma, all that we can say is you will be born in some good place where you will experience the rewards of your good karma. Where that place is, whether that place is heaven or this or that, I have no idea. But that's the general principle. So we have come, I think I've been able to cover almost all or most of the questions asked today. So thank you for your questions and your participation in this discussion. We'll conclude with the prayer now. And next week when we meet, we will take up a very important section of the second chapter, when Krishna will describe the characteristics of a person who becomes enlightened. And that's a very, very significant part. So we'll study that next week. So please, let's do the concluding prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be.